If you have already put some hours into the Mound Omen of Cthulhu, you have likely realized that this game does not forgive mistakes. I spent a considerable amount of time exploring every corner of this cosmic nightmare, testing strategies, dying more times than I would like to admit, and in the end, I separated the 10 tips that actually helped me. This is not that basic content you have seen everywhere else. These are things that make a real difference in how you play, understand the enemies, and survive the horror that awaits deep down in that basement. Stay with me until the end, because at least a few tips here might help you. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. This tip is one of the ones I like to reinforce the most, because it solves a problem that practically every group faces in the first few hours. The game's madness system is treacherous in a very clever way. It does not affect everyone equally, so while you might be seeing a bush slowly turning into a crawling monster, your partner next to you might be looking at a completely normal plant. It is at this moment that many people make the mistake of firing away without confirming anything with the group. What I learned in practice is that spatial voice chat is not just an immersion feature, it is practically a survival tool. Before spending ammunition, which is scarce enough to make any run tense, it is always worth stopping for a second and asking, "Are you seeing this too?" It seems silly, but this simple question has saved me from wasting shots on allies who, to my hallucinating brain, looked like creatures straight out of the abyss. The reason this works so well is that madness in this game is individual, so it creates genuine paranoia within the group. Each player starts to doubt their own perception, and that is exactly where constant communication becomes the difference between a smooth run and a complete disaster, where the monster you shot was, in fact, your partner carrying the team's last supplies. I honestly think this mechanic is one of the most brilliant points of the game's cooperative design, because it transforms communication into survival in a way that few Lovecraftian titles manage. So if you want to enjoy the Mound Omen of Cthulhu at its maximum potential with friends, adopt this habit from the very first session. Confirm before you act. This small pause might be exactly what separates your group from surviving another night or becoming another victim of cosmic madness. Staying near the ox-wagon becomes almost an emotional anchor for the team because it helps reduce madness, little by little, while you are still trying to get out of the mess alive. What I like here is that it completely changes how you read the map. Instead of running around chasing loot like it is a common co-op, you start to treat the cart as a control point, a place where the team breathes, organizes the inventory, and decides the next step without falling apart mentally. And this detail of multiple players messing with the inventory at the same time is exactly the kind of thing that makes an escape cleaner and less chaotic. In practice, this reduces that feeling of everyone fighting for space and turns the cart into a tactical tool, not just an improvised transport. To me, this is one of the smartest tips in the game because it brings survival, management, and team rhythm into one point. If you ignore the ox-wagon, Sanity will collect the debt. If you use it well, it becomes the center of the plan and facilitates both the exit and the quick collection of resources. In Omen of Cthulhu, hunting deer is not just a side activity to gain an immediate resource. It enters as part of a larger economy, where even the food you deliver can strengthen your next expedition. What I find most interesting here is that the game rewards those who think in the long term. You are not just gathering meat to solve the current round, because by taking these supplies to the cook on the galleon, you are helping to improve the healing rations permanently, which makes the next outings much safer. This creates a very smart type of decision. Sometimes the player wants to run after the main objective, but the game reminds you that stopping to hunt can be worth much more than it seems. I like this type of system because it gives real weight to every detour and makes the team think better about risk, reward, and priority. This is a tip that changes the mindset. Instead of seeing the deer as just another target in the scenery, you start to see the hunt as an investment, because each piece of meat delivered can leave the group better prepared to withstand the horrors of the following expedition. This tip is one that many people completely ignore, because they look at the torch and think, oh, this is just to light up a dark hallway. But in the Mound Omen of Cthulhu, the common torch carries a function that completely changes the dynamic of prolonged combats, especially when you are dealing with those jungle vines that insist on bringing enemies back in the middle of a fight. I discovered this in the most frustrating way possible, in a run where my group was already exhausted of resources, killing the same enemy multiple times without understanding why he simply would not die for good. It was only when someone had the idea to light the torch near the vines that we noticed the pattern. They retreat immediately, completely cutting off the reanimation attempt, and finally allowing the combat to move forward without this endless cycle. What makes this mechanic so important is that it turns the torch into a tactical tool, not just a cosmetic one. Instead of spending extra ammo trying to contain enemies that return repeatedly, you solve the problem at the root by neutralizing the very vines responsible for the reanimation. This saves precious resources and drastically reduces the time of combats that, without this information, can drag on in an exhausting and unnecessary way. I strongly recommend that you adopt this habit from now on. Whenever you notice jungle vines nearby during a longer combat, light the torch and keep it close. It is a small change in behavior that makes a giant difference in the fluidity of your runs in the Mound, Omen of Cthulhu, and it is exactly that type of detail that separates those who survive efficiently from those who stay stuck repeating the same confrontation without understanding why. At the beginning, it is very easy to fall into the instinct of firing at everything, running from one side to the other, and using the medallion whenever that insecurity hits. The problem is that the game is literally listening to all of this, and the jungle responds in a way you do not want to see when you are still unprepared. I realized this when some runs started to escalate too quickly for no apparent reason. We would clear an area, make noise without thinking, gunshots, hurried footsteps, breaking branches, and suddenly it felt like the game had decided to turn against us. More enemies, more pressure, and that clear feeling that something had awakened. And it had. The jungle's awakening accelerates precisely because of this excess stimulation. After you understand this, the approach changes completely. Melee weapons stop being a weak option and become a primary strategy in many moments. Advancing calmly, avoiding running unnecessarily, and using the medallion only when it really matters makes an absurd difference in the pace of the game. You start to realize that controlling noise is, in practice, controlling the difficulty of the game. If there is one piece of direct advice I can give you here, it is play as if the environment were alive, because it is. Each of your actions has a consequence, and the more you respect that, the more the game gives you room to breathe. Ignoring noise turns the experience into an uncontrolled nightmare. Learning to manage it turns your run into something much more strategic and, above all, survivable. In this game, the lantern does not serve only to light the way. It can also become an improvised weapon, and this is exactly the type of detail I love discovering in a cooperative game. The most interesting thing is that this mechanic does not feel like just a neat little trick. It has real utility against specific threats, especially the creeping canopy, which apparently is one of the most annoying enemies in the experience. And when a game gives you a tool that solves exactly that problem that bothers you the most, you start paying much more attention to the rhythm of the match and the team's positioning. In practice, this changes how you play because it encourages you to think of the lantern as an offensive resource, not just a defensive one. I like this type of design because it rewards observation and improvisation. You are not just surviving, you are learning to turn the environment and items into an advantage. And this fits very well with the chaotic vibe of a Lovecraftian cooperative. So if you are going to play the Mound, it is worth keeping this idea in mind. Instead of using the lantern just to see, try to view it as an emergency solution against certain monsters, and especially against the creeping canopy. It is the type of advanced tip that seems small at first, but later becomes one of those things that make the difference between a lost group and a group that really starts to control the situation. In the middle of exploration, it is easy to ignore those glowing mushrooms, thinking they are just part of the scenery or, worse yet, some trap. But in practice, they function as one of the most valuable resources in the game when it comes to keeping your sanity under control. I started to value this after some very tense situations, where the madness was already at the limit and everything started to distort. Enemies that were not there, sounds that did not make sense, that constant feeling of paranoia. It was precisely in these moments that consuming the luminescent mushrooms became a type of breather within the chaos, recovering sanity and bringing a bit of clarity back to continue the run. The interesting thing is that this adds a very strong strategic layer. You do not want to go around consuming everything you find right away, but you also cannot ignore them completely. Knowing when to use these mushrooms, especially before more dangerous situations or when your perception is already compromised, can prevent wrong decisions that end up costing dearly, especially in a game where madness distorts what is real. In practice, I started to treat these mushrooms almost as a mental emergency kit. Whenever possible, I keep this option in mind and stay attentive to the environment so I do not miss any. Because at the end of the day, in the Mound Omen of Cthulhu, it is not just your life that needs to be managed. Your sanity is what defines if you are really in control of the situation or just reacting to what the game wants you to see. Since the game does not bet on a traditional jump or a strong roll to save you, learning to move sideways with precision becomes almost its own language of defense. I really like this type of mechanic because it takes the focus off the press a dodge button reflex and places more weight on fine character control. Instead of spending stamina all the time, you start to realize that a well-executed sidestep is worth much more than trying to flee in desperation. This makes combat more tense and more intelligent, because every wrong step costs a price. The most interesting thing is that this lateral movement does not only serve to escape a specific attack, but to keep you alive for longer without exhausting yourself. In a cooperative game, this is even more valuable because when you save stamina, you remain useful to the group for longer and do not become that player who gets stuck, slow, and vulnerable at the worst possible moment. In the end, mastering sidestepping in this game is almost like learning to dance in the middle of horror. You are not trying to overcome the enemy's brute force, but rather avoid direct contact with intelligence, economy of movement, and cleaner timing. And honestly, this type of detail is what separates those who are just playing from those who really start to understand the game's rhythm. This is a tip that many people only realize too late, when they have already lost several runs unnecessarily. Logbooks are not just lore thrown on the map to enrich the world. They are, in practice, one of the most important pieces of progression. Ignoring these records is basically choosing to always play at a disadvantage. I myself took a while to give them their due value. At the beginning, the priority was to survive, loot quickly, and try to extract as soon as possible. But when I started to focus on finding these logs in the abandoned forts, the game simply opened up. New starting points began to appear, routes became safer, and accessing deeper areas stopped being an almost suicidal mission, and started to be something planned. The impact of this on subsequent runs is huge. Instead of always repeating the same slow and risky start, you already begin with more options, more control, and a clear feeling of real progression. This saves time, reduces risk, and, above all, allows you to explore the map much more efficiently, without depending only on luck. If you want to evolve for real in the game, treat the logs as a priority whenever you find a fort. Even if it seems like a detour at the moment, the benefit comes later, and it comes strong. This is the type of decision that does not only improve one run, but improves all the next ones you make. This is, for me, one of the most important tips, because it talks less about combat and more about decision-making maturity. In a cooperative game, not every situation needs to turn into an attempt at heroism. Sometimes the smartest move is to accept that the mission has already become too expensive and leave with what you can still save. I really like it when a game punishes greed in this way, because it creates real tension. You start thinking, just one more item, just one more room, just one more advance, and suddenly the entire team is at their limit, without sanity, without resources, and about to lose everything for insisting too much. It is that type of pressure that makes you respect the game, instead of trying to force a beautiful victory. The strongest part of this tip is understanding that extracting with partial loot is still a victory. If you manage to secure a rare artifact, an important log, or even basic supplies for the next attempt, that can already be worth much more than risking a total wipe because of greed. In co-op, saving part of the progress is usually better than turning a good run into a total disaster. This mentality completely changes the way you play. You stop thinking only about what you can gain at that exact moment and start evaluating what the team might lose if you continue. And honestly, this type of reading is what separates a group that survives by instinct from a group that really learns to play with a cool head.